Good morning. Welcome to our technical exchange meeting to discuss the Menlo security for web isolation and highly evasive adaptive threats. My name is Angela Gibson with Abraham's Consulting, and we have 4 practice areas, one of which is the vast majority of hardware and software that we resell to the government. And the second practice area is niche solutions around storage, security, and networking. And the third being technical staffing and managed services is the 4th area. The screen here kind of gives you an overview of our capabilities. We are a minority women-owned small business serving the technology needs of small, medium, and enterprise businesses since 2006. And so today, Menlo is an example of one of the partners that we work with to bring these emerging technologies or niche solutions to the federal, state, and local government. And I'm very pleased to be able to join Alex Kaporsis. I'm butchering your name, even though I tried to practice it beforehand.
No problem.
Rolling. But thank you so much. I'm sure this overview will be very beneficial to you. And you can also reach out to us afterwards on the replay so that we can set up your own individualized, personalized presentation in the event that you were not able to attend the live demonstration. So thank you. I'm going to pass the wheel over to Alex.
Thank you, Angela. Again, my name is Alex Kaporsis. I'm the systems engineer here at Menlo, covering the New York City metro area with some of our larger accounts. I also have here, attending here is our account manager that I work with, Paul Rowland. You may see him as Lewis, but he's going by Lewis today on the webinar. But I'll just give him a few minutes just to introduce himself, and so I don't butcher any more of his name.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to see everybody. I'm Paul Rowland. I'm account executive here at Menlo. Been here a little over 2 years, responsible for sales in the New York and New Jersey area. And you know, a lot of you might be your introduction to isolation for web browsing and email. And Alex is going to give you a great overview of how we approach that and locking down devices, ensuring no malware is getting down to your endpoint. So excited about this session, and looking forward to hearing what Alex has to say. And also, if there is interest, we're looking forward to scheduling follow-up sessions with everybody. So Alex, let's take it away.
Sure, great. Thanks, Paul. So what we'll do is we'll just talk about the topic of the day, which is ransomware. Ransomware has now become synonymous, probably, or as commonplace to people's vocabulary as spam is, or somebody dialing your phone with all these spamming calls. But ransomware has been around for quite a while, and it's actually been very impactful that now it's very visible to the C-level at all corporations, because of not only just its initially it was kind of annoyance, but destructiveness, and also hitting the bottom line for a lot of corporations from impacting their business reputation and stealing of valuable intel IP from their organizations. Now, why is it? We've taken some statistics that are out there with regards to from different sources, just to let you know that, hey, this is still a very prevalent form of attack. They've actually refined it over the years. These threat actors, they're either state-sponsored or criminal organizations, and it's becoming very, very apparent that this is not slowing down, and it's actually accelerating. A lot of this typically was driven towards malicious activity, but now it's being commoditized and commercialized to where it's now going after corporations in terms of, or even states, to put irreparable harm inside of organizations. Nobody's immune to this. it's crazy. It's this is just a few, and it's like not even the tip of the iceberg in terms of corporations that have been affected or impacted. And these are the ones that are just publicly disclosed that we've taken just to put into perspective. You can see it goes across the spectrum in terms of verticals. Nobody's safe from this, from education through to corporations to financial. Even it all depends on where you're at what time, and a lot of these organizations don't even know that they may be targeted or being looked at. The way that these threat actors are working today is that they just hit everybody. The analogy would be, think about somebody coming to rob homes. They're just kicking in the front door of all the houses and just trying to get into wherever it's easiest. And ransomware, through the different types of attack through the web browser and email, have been proven such a great way of getting into organizations and corporations, because there, in the end, there is a human factor element to this that we'll get into. And we, as defenders of our own domain, have to be 100% right, where the threat actors just have to be right once. Let's just talk about what's, traditionally what, the life cycle of it, right? The attack is launched, it comes, or the threat actors are trying to penetrate to get into your network. What happens is basically from this aspect is once they get in onto your side of the house, you're basically got two things that you're gonna faced with. Am I gonna pay for it or pay their demands, or am I gonna not pay for the demands and hope all my backups and everything are worth it? This is not the position you want to be in, right? You do not, want people to come knocking at your door, but not to get in. But once they're in, they just don't immediately launch these attacks. They sit and look inside of your network and observe, start collecting credentials, start planting themselves inside of there to form. And when they're ready to launch their attack, or they're ready inside of your network and they know where the data is, they know how to hurt you. And once they launch it, that's the portion where it's too late to do anything other than pay up or hope that you can recover from it. And then sometimes even paying for these type of attacks is not always the best thing, because now you're a soft target. These guys talk a lot. So they're saying, hey, they're willing to pay. You could come back and hit these guys again if they don't fix their infrastructure, or you're never 100% sure. You'll have to spend a lot of money to figure out, are they still in my network and could they come back and do this again? Because you're just depending on the honesty of the hackers that they'll be taking the money and leaving you alone. Not a good position to be in either way.
Depending on the honesty of hackers.
Yes, it's counterintuitive, right? But if you're going to pay them. And one last note too, right? It's sad to say, but when you talk, especially at the state, local level, education, we deal with a lot of customers that are at that level, and they have crypto wallets. And the only reason that they have crypto wallets is because they've been paying out some of these ransoms, because they just don't have the staff. Staff is overwhelmed. IT is overwhelmed with the veracity and flooding of into, not only being able to maintain the technologies, the different levels of technologies that they have, but the sheer volume of things that are coming into in terms of alerts, in terms of activity inside of the network. It's like having a humongous hay bale. There's a bunch of needles inside of it, and these needles could be related or unrelated, but very hard to see. And that's the challenge that people are having today. So, over the years, everyone has had technology. We have built out this layer of defenses, and technologies, and the most recent of that and prevalence inside of the stack of security products, from your secure web gateway, antivirus, scanning, has been the sandbox. Hey, we're going to be sandboxing everything. That's 10 years old. right? When the first sandbox is still coming out. It hasn't stopped any of this stuff really in terms of happening. Now, argument could be said, corporations, it's hard to implement and do different things, but these technologies have been around for a long time. The attacks, these ransomwares, these highly evasive and adaptive threats, the reason why we call that the acronym HEAT is because they adapt. They're penetrating. They're trying to figure out what's working. So they've had 10 years of sandboxing and all these other technologies to figure out how to squeeze through the cracks and penetrate through your systems. Initially, the very first thing was nobody inspected HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic. Oh, I'm just going to tunnel all my stuff through HTTPS. That was great. It's like having a humongous firewall and there's a big hole right through the middle that everybody's going to go and travel through. So people started inspecting HTTPS or SSL traffic. Great. But then you had other aspects. Oh, we're going to do it by content categorizations. That didn't work because now what happens when there is no content category for something? They will penetrate and figure out which way and adapt to be able to get their information through your stack of defenses to the endpoint. What is common? The endpoint has always been the last line of defense. And that's where we get into other aspects that are very prevalent these days in terms of having your endpoint or other tools that we'll get into and discuss about that to try to discover this thing. But, for me, that's like coming right to my doorstep inside the house. And now I've got to try to deal with it inside of there. I'd rather deal with it way out here than inside. Here are the technologies that and these are, I'm not saying you don't need these, but this is what we have today. EDR, right? Once the endpoint detection and response, it's in the house already. It's a valuable tool to understand what's going on, but by the time this detects it and lets you know and tries to stop it, it's already within inside of your walls. Two-factor authentication, great idea as well for restricting access to vital systems, applications, and identity, but does nothing to really stop ransomware or malware once it's within inside of your network. This stuff is just for access control or privilege access to applications, but nothing really to do with your systems once the ransomware is inside. Threat intelligence, this is great, just like any knowledge is power, and having these threat intelligence and indicators of compromise is all great. But when it's the new stuff or stuff that has morphed into something new, it's usually, in most cases, is lagging behind the curve for detection or understanding response. So if you've never seen it, a one-day wonder, it's the first time it's hit anybody, this stuff is not up to date. And it's great for the drive-by known stuff, but not for the highly adaptive and new stuff coming down the pipe. This chart just lets you know, and I was just reminiscing as I was talking to someone about this, is that back in 2014, I remember the big hacks of Target, right? That really set things in motion. The public perception was the biggest data breach as it was. But it also, in that same year, talking about how OpenSSL was compromised, and now it changed the paradigm for all websites these days, where back then you may have seen 25% of network traffic being encrypted. If I told you that today, people would be saying that's crazy, right? Because now it's gone from 25% all the way up to 90% of corporate traffic, or even traffic on the internet is close to 90% encrypted, which is great. But the unintended consequences from that also was that nobody was inspecting SSL. Either they found it too challenging, or the tools that were in place would necessitate upgrading them or providing more hardware. So they had challenges to inspect SSL. And because of that factor, the bad actors knew this, and the easiest path, just like water trying to get into your house, it's going to go take the easiest path through a crack or somewhere that hasn't been addressed. They felt, well, primary traffic of a web browser goes over port 80 or 443, and nobody's inspecting it, or not inspecting it to the high degree. They just would tunnel right through, just like all other traffic, into and launch their and find an easy path into the networks. And as you can see with this chart, you would thought by 2014, with all the security awarenesses and all the tools that we've done, that ransomware would have been solved by now. You just could see by this chart now that ransomware is not only accelerated, it's grown and is approaching double the amount that you saw back in 2014, which is crazy to me. So from our
even with all the security measures that people have right now, they're still exposed unless they have a tool that will address the threats that are constantly adapting. And you're saying that Menlo is the solution to this.
Well, we'll get into it. We'll talk about isolation as part of that solution. There is definitely other aspects to it, but think about today, when you do your daily life of work from remote, and COVID and the pandemic kind of accelerated this, is that now for corporations, they had a challenge. They used to have 10 locations, 20 locations, offices, they built their little castles there. Well, when the pandemic hit and everybody became a remote worker, what happened? They got now thousands of offices everywhere. Right. And they couldn't manage those offices to understand, well, that person, we give them the laptop. If they're at their home and they're hopping on their Wi-Fi at home, they don't have that same security stack that I would have normally inside of the office. So potentially, depending on how these companies did it, that those endpoints could probably introduce the threats into the network, because then they connect back to the network over VPN, and there's just another door. So it complicated the lives of all the corporations, because now they have, went from handful of areas to defend to thousands of points of defense.
Got it.
And then from our Menlo labs, it just proved from the statistics that we brought out that this acceleration has continued and is growing. It's not stopping. And these highly evasive adaptive threats are continually finding success. So it's not even a whack-a-mole anymore. It's like trying to catch up and just trying to figure out what's the next thing that they're going to try to do in terms of adjusting the way that they're doing their attacks to get into your environment. And then once they're in their environment, how they're exfiltrating the data or trying to impact you. Just come here. Oh, I don't know why my slides have stopped. One moment. Okay, there we go. Great. So I'm just going to talk about one technique here. There's many other ones that we could talk about, but this is just one that should resonate with everybody. Sandboxing, right? So the techniques of sandboxing or even file inspection. The threat actors, once they first came into there, basically I tried to figure out, okay, with every system, there is some sort of limitation. And how can I get around this limitation or expose that limitation? Well, with sandboxing, what would happen is you would have a file that you would want to go and retrieve, and then it will come through so you make your request, you go to that website, and you're retrieving that file. Well, these threat actors understood now that inside of this security stack of scanning of these files, there's some limitations to the size of the files. And once those file limitations are hit, if it wasn't properly configured or policy put into place, you could actually bypass even the sandboxing because of the size of the file. Sandboxes typically for performance were tuned to say 2 megs or less. then these files that were greater than 2 megs or 2 gigs, whatever the arbitrary number was, you can actually send down a file that's greater than that amount. And in most configurations, it would be allowed, not scanned and passed through. Big area. That's one oversimplification of a way to do it. A more sophisticated way that's now come through here, that's been proven successful for a lot of the large threat actors out there, that are behind some of the latest ones from like the WannaCries and other SolarWinds and so forth, have this concept called HTTP smuggling. What's HTTP smuggling? Well, they're leveraging the web page of that they have provided out here, and they're actually sending small bits of unrelated data that would appear to the scanning devices within inside of HTTP. And these blobs or blocks, once they hit the web browser, are reassembled over here where it's at the endpoint already. It's passed through here. And once it's reassembled here, that's when it's executed within inside of the script of the web page, of the Java page. Because inherently what happens is your web browser requests information and then comes down to your web browser at your computer to build out that page. Well, now they're using that same mechanism, and this is the baking soda effect, right? You have this mechanism built out, and its intents and purposes is to build web pages at your browser. Well, they're taking that same mechanism and weaponizing it to be able to tunnel through or smuggle this information, small bits of information inside through your security stack and reassemble it down here. And now suddenly the file has been dropped. And once this file is dropped, then they could tunnel out with a secure connection to establish their beachhead. So pretty scary stuff when it's done right. And from what we've seen, and in these major threat actors, they've been exposing it and using it across the board for these largest attacks. We just called out a few here, but they've been taking this same HTTP smuggling and using it as a full effect, their first pieces to do it. And this is all a challenge for a lot of the security stack vendors from the secure web gateways and other scanning devices, because it's inherently built within inside of the page. This is the challenge that we here at Menlo, and we've adopted isolation at the core to take this paradigm away, that it doesn't matter what happens. Why do all this kind of traffic and bring it down to the endpoint where we could shift that outside of the network, but yet allow the user to still have the same user experience as they normally would with their native browser. So if you take a moment to understand isolation, when we talk about isolation, is to isolate these activities that normally would happen on the web browser and within inside of our platform. This is our approach. There's other people that take this similar approach, but what we do is we establish a connection from your web browser to our cloud service. When you look at the source page of a web page anymore, it's like 20 lines, where all the other stuff that's happening inside of that web page is being executed in the safe disposable container within inside of our platform, and the results are streamed down to your endpoint. So it's like when you go to the fountain and turn on the tap and you get the water, that's all you care about. You don't want to understand all the mechanisms of how to get that water. You want to consume the service. So here, what we do is we render the page inside of our platform, and then we stream the results. So it's almost like a remote session to this remote browser to the endpoint. Nothing makes it down to the endpoint. Files, executables, JavaScripts, all these threat areas that we just talked about to try to get onto the endpoint happen inside of our platform, inside of this disposable containers. And when your session's done, we trash that whole session, and that's it, it's disposed. So none of these threats or these vectors of attack happen at the endpoint anymore. And that's really where we excel at, from the user experience and that safety. So I just want to illustrate this, and this should resonate with the audience in terms of what has, big questions have been about educating the end user, right? Because it's a human factor, right? But we are a multitasking, challenged environment now that we have to, it's very stressful to be 100% right 100% of the time. And the threat actors know this. So we have training, to educate users in terms of understanding what to do with the URLs, links, good practices, tricking the users into with phishing sites to steal their credentials or harvest credentials. These are all challenges. But with isolation, by just deploying isolation, both from the web browser and potentially through the email, all these are moot points now, right? They all have safety nets. They're still good for education, just as a general practice. But you as a corporation now, by putting things into isolation, these attacks that are, these techniques will not occur, because with isolation, we could make web pages read-only, meaning that we could protect the user and let them know that, hey, you really don't need to enter in your credentials here, because this is not really Office 365. The top 3 sites that are being positioned and faked out are from Microsoft, PayPal, and Amazon, right? But there's many different ones inside of there. And the threat actors know this, because going back to that one topic that we talked about, intelligence, threat actors know about this intelligence networks that everybody has. So they spin up and create websites, and they just don't immediately launch the attack. They allow them to sit out there 3, 6, 9 months to get high reputation or good reputations. So now they will get categorized inside of a safe category that they're intending to. And then when they launch their attack, they could put that information inside of there. It will pass right through the security devices, and they just got to be right once before that's updated, and all these other security tools now know that this site is being compromised or anything. They've already gotten in before that's happened. This is how far thinking that they have, and they're just working through the system. Well, all these techniques here in educating the users was to prevent a lot of that stuff happening. But if you go to your average user and you ask them, hey, before you click on a domain, just go and double check that that domain is real, right? Or it's most users don't have that luxury or knowledge to do that stuff. But with isolation and that techniques that we talked here at Menlo, you have that safety net to be assured as your IT organization and SOC that even if that user had a momentary lapse in judgment or a bad day or just made a mistake, that clicking of that link has not exposed anything to the endpoint. It also takes, and I'll say this one last piece about other benefits to the organization, takes the noise off of the endpoint. Think about what SOC security organizations or operation centers are doing on a daily basis from your EDR and your endpoint, all these alerts that are coming in. If we can alleviate 80 to 90% of that noise factor, because it's not executing at the endpoint, it's not within inside of your network, it's outside. Now they could use those tools and resources to focus on really other avenues of attack that are happening within inside of the organization. So just in summary, again, we talked a lot about for the different techniques and that are out there and highly evasive adaptive threats. Traditional systems are not immune to this and are very vulnerable to this because the threat actors have been around it for a long time, understand the systems, and always penetrating and adapting their techniques to try to penetrate through there. By implementing isolation at your core of your security or as an augmentation to your security for that final last line of defense or catch-all net, but what we like to call the heat shield, because this is actually not, any of these techniques are not coming into your network, not affecting your endpoint, but allowing your users to interact and work productively throughout their day. So that's fine. That's all I had for today, talking about this portions, and just letting you know that by implementing isolation, especially with the way that we've done it from our perspective, for the user experience, will ensure that none of those techniques through a web browser or email vector will get back into your network. So the days of ransomware and highly evasive threats affecting your organization are short in terms of days to be able to do those things.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. I'm sure our audience will be glad to know this information, and we'll be in touch with you and Paul. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me here at Abraham's Consulting. My name is Angela Gibson at Abraham's Consulting. My number is right there on the slide, and we can set up your personalized demonstration at your convenience. Have a great day, guys, and we'll be in touch.